Namaskar Vasudev ji, Namaskar Lipika ji. It's such a
Namaskar.
pleasure to have you both here, accepting our request to be here today on a very important subject and a book, especially in the world where we live today, which is scale over quality, which is speed over trust and surveillance over privacy. Where do we get the wisdom that is required, and a wisdom that has been catered close to 2,500 years ago. We may claim it so it to be. And over a period of 400 years, how Maharishi Patanjali has compiled the Yoga Sutras. Also, it holds a very important relevance today, considering as our country we are celebrating the Day of Languages. Somebody who gave the corrections to or the editing to Panini's Vyakaran. It's a great day to celebrate Maharishi Patanjali. And altogether, what he did was the most difficult of all the tasks, or most complex ones, is to simplify the ancient wisdom into the form of 196 scriptures. Today, we are gathered here with Vasudev Murthy, who's the author of this remarkable book, Yoga Sutras, that I'm holding in my hand. I must complete the title of the book, which is Yoga Sutras Simplified, not just Yoga Sutras. We all know about Yoga Sutras. Most of us who are enthusiasts in ancient wisdom would definitely know about it. And we have come to know, especially in the today's world, simplification is a bigger complex task as in the corporate world where most of us come from, especially Vasudevji himself, who's a corporate trainer now and has a very illustrious background in his other responsibilities. He's a remarkable author who has written some very fascinating books, and knowing him is truly a privilege, especially who has written Sherlock Holmes like a Tintin in many countries. That's what he has done to Sherlock Holmes. He's written a book on smashing the entire literary world through Ramgarh Literature Festival. And talking about literature, we have another eminent guest with us here today is Lipika Ulyalji. Comes from the world of literature in India and across the globe. In fact, I got a signed copy of Pulaho Kole as a gift from Lipika Ulyal. Who better than her to gift me a book like that? And all the remarkable literature that she has always suggested to me. And when she recommended this book, it became a matter of honor for us to do a discussion around this. And for that, I request Lipika, आप बताएं इस किताब के बारे में. And also, you have a inclination towards understanding ancient Indian wisdom, which is absolutely timeless. Throw some more light onto it, give a context, and then we will come to the lecture by Vasudevji. Please unmute yourself. Yeah.
Thank you, Mohit. Thank you very much for inviting me here, and I look forward to being part of this conversation after. But before I begin, I would request everybody to join their hands as I sing a small shloka to begin my experience of Yoga Sutras Simplified. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Namaskar. I'm delighted to be introducing this book by an author and a friend who I see is himself on a journey of soul searching through his writings. As Mohit rightly pointed out in his introduction to Vasudev's work, he started out with a book on music and then delved into several genres, including business writing, thriller, and satire. And but what I feel is Vasudev has finally found a Purna with his book. And I would not say Purna Viram, but it's a beginning to something which is complete. And I wish him all the very best for embarking on this journey, on this wonderful journey. Many will, during this conversation, have questions on why he has, especially in terms of his writing, as to why he had to delve into different genres, or why he wrote his book and what inspired him. And I would love to be part of the audience to Murthy's answers to your questions. But to me, I see this book as a perfect transition into what was meant to be for Vasudev and the musician Vasudev. Our Indian classical art forms are so rooted and so deeply rooted into our history and Indic systems. So it was very natural, I think, for a musician's imagination, for Yoga Sutras to pique the interest and imagination of the musician in Murthy. The 196 sutras, the one-line short sutras by the great sage Patanjali, which have formed the backbone of this book, Vasudev's book, Yoga Sutra Simplified, are almost musical. And, I would like to bring your attention to him actually quoting each one of them at the end of the book. Patanjali as a brand, we usually, especially a particular, I think, generation would think of it from Baba Ramdev's perspective. And the first thing that would come to anyone's mind would be, yoga, when you hear of Patanjali. Very few, I think, especially in the current generation, would know of the great saint, Patanjali, who thousands of years ago, even before several of the new age scientists were born, had mastered the body science. These sutras are nothing but your key to life sciences and living a very mindful life. The concept of centering your energies for a better life is what I feel these sutras tell you. Some of the greatest spiritual and yogic leaders like Swami Vivekananda have interpreted these Yoga Sutras, and I mentioned it in one of my posts when I did an introductory post to the book a while back. And in the past, there have been BKS Iyengar who've interpreted Yoga Sutras and put out a book there in writing. So it's very refreshing actually to have Murthy, and his interpretation of the sutras set in a very modern environment of the e-generation or the generation of WhatsApp and YouTube. I view Yoga Sutras Simplified as an important book for every reader who was focused to achieve better. It is a book for every person looking for training your mind and body. It is a book for every human being who's seeking his spiritual side. And once again, my many congratulations to Vasudev on such a brilliant start to several books that I see coming from him. To add to this Purna, as I said, I would like to initiate this discussion between Mohit and Vasudev with another shloka, which is actually a prayer to Patanjali, sage Patanjali, and maybe end it up at that. Yogena chittasya padena vacham malam sharirasya cha vedyakena yopakarottamam pravaram munina Patanjalim pranjaliranto asmi. Let us bow before the noblest of sages, Patanjali, who gave yoga for serenity and sanctity of mind, grammar for clarity and purity of speech, and medicine for perfection of health. Our dandavats before sage Patanjali. Now I'll step out of the mainframe to be part of the audience, and thank you very much, Mohit and Nipun, again from Friends of Books for inviting me for this. It's been a joy to be introducing Vasudev's book. Thank you.
Thank you, Lipika. There could be no better way to introduce not only Maharishi Patanjali, as well as the setting the context of the book. And initially, when I started reading the book, Vasudev has given a confession that he, like many others, had no idea what Yoga Sutras are, or is Patanjali also related to Yoga Sutras? And that's exactly what has happened to me also. And especially while going through the book, I have a confession to make to everyone who is joining. This is possibly one of the first books or a session where I'm doing this session without reading the entire book. Especially, I went into the first pada, and I realized I am not in a state to get immersed into this book unless and until there's a community with which I can speak, with whom I can discuss, I can listen to. And that's why possibly we will launch the co-read of the book as well. Vasudev, you and I can discuss. This book
Thank you
deserves
very
to be.
much.
Yes, so this deserves to be a co-read, Vasudev. And without further ado, with this confession, I invite you to present us the simplified version of the Yoga Sutras, simplified today.
Okay, so first of all, thank you so much for this fantastic platform. I'm very grateful to Lipika. She's my good friend, and she always supports me in whatever I try to do. And lots of nice words from her. To talk about the simplification. I have a short presentation which basically covers the book. I'm going to preempt a couple of questions which I'm sure will be coming as to how I happened to write this after having written many books about other kinds of things which are obviously not related to Yoga Sutras at all. But perhaps that is in an interesting way. One of the things that comes out of it is your mind is everywhere, but can it be focused, which is what yoga is all about anyway. It happened about a couple of years ago, maybe less than a couple of years ago, where the publisher reached out to me and said that he was aware of my enthusiasm about yoga, because I happened to have met him on a couple of occasions, and he wanted me to write a simplified version of the Yoga Sutras, which it sounds simple, but actually it's not. And I think Mohit has mentioned that to actually take extremely complex ideas and then actually try to simplify it was very, very exhausting. And I would say my hair became white because of that exercise, right? Because it was really, really quite a challenge to write it in a form that was acceptable. So we did a lot of engineering of the book. Now, just to say that I think both of you have mentioned people like B.K.S. Iyengar and Swami Vivekananda have written about the Yoga Sutra. So who am I? How dare I write a book on the Yoga Sutras? Frankly, that could be asked, right? And so the kind of details of their book are at an even greater level of subtlety and so on and so forth. But I would say the so-called difference between their book and my book, not to say mine is any better, but it's just a simpler version, is written from a point of view of the Aam Aadmi, in the sense I am the Aam Aadmi here, okay? And what I have also done is I have taken all the sutras to the very end so that they don't disturb the flow of the reader. The reason for that is sometimes in Devanagari, it's in Sanskrit. So if you're not familiar with Sanskrit or Devanagari, the reading process might be hindered as you come across a line that you can't decipher, and you might decide to step back a little bit. So we took that aside. I put it in the end. I've used graphics, because I think graphics is the modern way of conveying information. We should do that wherever it's possible. So there's been an attempt to have graphics. There's also been a lot of my own experiences, my shortcomings, limitations which I've freely expressed. But I really am frankly on a journey. So it's not that at the end of my life somehow I'll attain yoga. I don't think so. I think I have a good 4 or 5 or 10 million years of janam again to achieve the state. But having said that, the point here is, if all these brilliant texts of our past are are kept in the state of rarefied understanding, or of rarefied conditioning, where you have to know Sanskrit, you have to know this, you have to learn from a guru, and you read dense texts, I do believe that the beautiful essence of these things will be lost. In particular, I would say that the Yoga Sutras are actually one of the cultural pillars of our country, our civilization and what have you. And obviously, yoga is a great gift from India to the rest of the world, synonymous and so on and so forth. With that, I wanted to take the opportunity to present, something about the Yoga Sutras. And as Mohit has said, we may have subsequent sessions where we go deeper into it. But let me use this time to tell you what the Yoga Sutras is all. So I'm not very good at PowerPoint, so please don't mind. It's a hodgepodge of stuff. And of course, the gentleman on the top right is indeed Patanjali. And I'm going to tell you about how I try to simplify it, because I feel the incredible intellectual richness of whatever he had to say and gives us hope as to why we are born. I mean, the reasoning, the logic is pretty sound. And if we're able to grasp it and try, then we are actually a little bit at ease, that we know why it's happening. Why are we behaving the way we are behaving? Why are we born? Why do we die? So these kinds of beautiful questions, it's not that this is the first time it's been asked, but they have been answered very beautifully by Patanjali. So over to that, I think that these pictures are something I need to just tell you a little bit about. So there is a story of Gonika. I'm just setting the context because you might wonder, some of you may want to know, who is Patanjali? Of course, you can always Google and find out, but you can hear it from me as well. That Adishesha, who as Vishnu was resting on, Adishesha said he wants to see Shiva's dance, in Chidambaram, which is, by the way, in Tamil Nadu. The reason I have this beautiful, statuette of Nataraja is because that's pretty much what you can see in Chidambaram. Now, you see, the story of Patanjali is so beautiful. It tells you how India is linked in thousands of different ways, north to south, east to west. I can tell you many stories like that. But supposedly, so then anyway, Patanjali fell into the hands of Gonika, who was a yogini, who was praying for a son. Apparently, the story goes that she knew she was on her way out and she wanted to have a son, and so Vishnu dropped the serpent into her hands, and she was a little alarmed, and the little serpent fell on the ground, and then he said, "Adopt me as a son." So in many pictures, including the one on the top right, and also the video in the middle, he's shown as half human and half snake. Okay, that's the esoteric significance of that. And you always find these two or three sages. For example, the top right, you see of two of them. They always seem to be always going around together, worshipping Shiva and what have you. Okay, so that is one thing. And then they say that he was this event happened perhaps in Uttarakhand or in the Himalayas anyway. And then the story is that he went down to Chidambaram. Some say he went down through a tunnel. Nevertheless, at some point he went all the way to Tamil Nadu, because that's where he was supposed to close his destiny and so on. And that's where he also watched Shiva dance. Okay. Now, if you go to Tamil Nadu, to the remote parts of Tamil Nadu, by the way, is changing rapidly, and that's the story, different story for which I wish I can talk about. But in any case, from the point of view of the Shiva, Shaivite traditions, as well as the peppering of Patanjali stories in various temples, all the way from Chidambaram, all the way down to Rameshwaram and many other places nearby, is very, very significant. And if you go to Chidambaram itself, the temple, which is not far from Pondicherry and so on, it will be an experience for a lifetime. So Bharatnatyam, by the way, incidentally, comes from Nataraja. So therefore, we're also talking about the close connection of all these things. So the story here, and I'm taking the time to explain this because I feel it's a really fascinating insight into our lovely traditions. And I'm obviously, with age, there's greater and love for our past, our traditions, which are to some extent, I won't say threatened, but it needs to be constantly fertilized and watered and so on. That's why I like to tell you these stories, because they're very interesting. So the story then was that after he saw this dance of Shiva, he wanted to teach the Yoga Sutras to whoever there were the people in that forest and so on. So he wanted to teach them, but he wanted to teach them as a thousand heads snake. Because it was poisonous and so on. So he decided to keep a screen between him and the 300 students who he was teaching. And that was the condition of his teaching, that I will teach only if there's a screen and I'm going to be behind it and I'm going to teach from there. So everybody said, fine, except one guy. There always has to be one guy who's going to create trouble. So he went and he said, why is this necessary? So he opened the screen, and then there was a devastating, burst of poisonous air and all that stuff. And everyone was burnt to ashes over there. Including that guy, by the way, except one guy who was late to class. Okay, so this tells you that sometimes it's not a bad idea to be late to class. But in any case, he was late, and at least he kind of saved the Yoga Sutras or whatever. So these are some very beautiful stories, and that's what. So now Patanjali is known, of course, for Ayurveda, and that's where, of course, Swami Ramdev is there, and then of course grammar, which Mohit alluded to, and finally the Yoga Sutra, which is of course a very deep and wonderful piece of a culture, as I mentioned. He has also written something called the Nataraja Stotram. What I will do is I will play it for exactly 30 or 40 seconds, just for you to get a feel for what that music is all about. And I'm hoping, when I click it, it'll get heard. There we go.
सदंचित मुदंचित निकुंचित पदम झल झलम चलित मंजुकटकम पतंजलि दृगंजन मनंजन मचंचल पदम जनन भंजन करम कदंब रुचिमं वरवसं परममं बुध कदंब कविडंबकगणं चिदं बुधिमणिं बुध हृदं भुजरविं परचिदंबरनटं हृदि भज.
So it is a very interesting, literally, the enunciation is so sharp and so complicated. My nephew knows this by heart, and he tells me this is something very special about it. There are certain vowels missing and so on and so forth. So the Nataraja Stotram is all there. So what I'm trying to tell you is that Patanjali is really an icon for Indian civilization in more ways than one. Did he really exist? Are these all myths? I really don't know. 2,500, 3,000 years ago, I really don't know. It doesn't matter. India, as we know it, owes a lot in many different ways to Patanjali. And like I said, the whole chain from the top, from Kashmir, Uttarakhand, wherever he was born, there's some talk about him being in the Pakistan side of Punjab as well, all the way down to Rameshwaram, essentially, completely encompassing this entire country. I think it's a very moving and touching thing as far as I'm concerned. So that was the story I wanted to talk about. Okay, so now I wanted to talk a little bit about the Yoga Sutras, which is what the book was all about. The challenge to me was, how do I write it and so on. So obviously, I had to delve very deeply into it and try to understand, first of all, the man behind this. That's why I spent some time over here. Let's go into some more stuff. So this very ugly graphic is going to tell you a little bit about how he organized these sutras. As we mentioned, there are 196 of them. And they're divided into 4 very logical kinds of groupings. Okay, the first is the Samadhi Pada, which is 51 sutras. The next is the Sadhana Pada, which is 55, Vibhuti Pada 56, and the last one, which is considered very challenging, and is the Kaivalya Pada, which is 34. Now, the reason for the strange triangle is because in my other avatar, okay, I'm like a Ravan avatar. I do many things, none of them very well. But in this one avatar, I teach business communication, right? And that is, it's not only about language and grammar. It's about how you structure your thoughts and how to present them so that people absorb it properly. Okay, and I found that though today we talk about these modern things as though they came from the UK and US. In my opinion, Patanjali had already cracked the code 2,500 or 3,000 years ago, and I'll tell you why. What he has done is he has directly explained what yoga is all about in line 1, actually line 2, but okay, line 1 of the Yoga Sutra. So he hasn't kept any suspense going at all. He says yoga chitta vritti nirodha. He starts from there. In fact, the earlier part, which is line 0 almost, is ataha yoga anushasanam, which means now begins the discipline of yoga. Straight, no preamble, no nothing. I'm getting to the point right now, because ultimate thing of yoga is union with some kind of a divine entity, whatever the case is. So he starts by telling us that the 8th limb of yoga, which I'll talk about, is samadhi. That's why it's called a Samadhi Pada. This is samadhi. So that is a very clever technique of communication, incidentally. Contrary to the way we have learned to communicate, which is we set the preamble, set the stage, etc., and then finally we come to the point in the 10th chapter or 10th page or whatever the case is. All right. So so what he starts with is a Samadhi Pada. He explains that this is samadhi. Once he does that, he says, okay, now that I've told you what samadhi is, now you'd like to know how to get it, how to get to the stage, and that's where the Sadhana Pada comes in. Very beautiful 55 lines, very gripping, to be honest. The Vibhuti Pada talks about the kind of challenges, the kinds of issues that you're likely to face during the pursuit of yoga. Okay, while you're working towards samadhi and with all these steps, you will face certain challenges, and these are the challenges. These are the powers that you will attain. But be careful. These other kinds of things may happen to you. And finally, there's a larger elaboration of a state called kaivalya, which I call as glorious isolation. So this is how he structured it in a very brilliant way. Now, if you think about it, he could have kept us waiting to explain what is samadhi right at the very end. He didn't do that. So that was what a master teacher in a way is what I would like to say. So let me continue. So I have each of these, well, the 2 or 3 slides. I've just shown you. First of all, you can see samples of the graphics that I have used. There are samples in the book, because in my view, we have to learn that today people are getting a lot of information, and it's very difficult just to say that this is a great intellectual piece of work. Please read it. Is not good enough. We have to talk about it with various kinds of graphics. So this is on the left hand side are some of the things I'd like to tell you about. So he starts with what is yoga, and he directly gets to the point, which I said, yoga chitta vritti nirodha, which means the stilling of the mind. And immediately, of course, the question is it really possible to do that at all? And that's going to be a lifetime's journey full of stress, all kinds of things happening to us and so on. It is really, really, really difficult. And I don't think I can claim that, I've reached that thing. Not at all. But we now know that it's a possibility. And that itself is a big step forward. So he says there are 5 kinds of modifications. I will leave that as a mystery as to what that means. But it's very well explained as to the mind can be modified in one of 5 ways, or many of the same time, right? Very beautifully explained. He also talks about there being a perfect being. He calls it Ishvara, and he says it can be accessed through Om and so on. So Ishvara is this idealized, being. It doesn't necessarily say human, but fine, idealized being, which is beyond time, which is beyond disease, which has complete knowledge, etc., etc. So in that context, all we are extremely weak carbon copies of that being, and we have all kinds of challenges. We are weak, we die, we don't know much, etc. But we are going towards a certain ideal. That's what he talks about. And then he's very, very smart. He says, there will be distractions. Don't assume that, and if we are aware of those distractions, then we can deal with it. What are those distractions? Things like laziness, things like, imagination, inertia. He's very, very clear that if your goal is yoga, there are likely to be all these distractions that you should be aware of, and then you can do something about it. He also talks about ill health. And I'm mentioning that specifically because in the next discussion, I'll tell you why he says that. But he talks about all these as being distractions on the path to yoga. Okay. Then he says, at the end of it, meditation is the answer. But, he doesn't say that. I think a lot of people perhaps feel that people who do meditation and do the spiritual stuff are basically running away from real life. That is not necessarily what he talks about here. And he says you have to have a sense of compassion towards everybody else. We call it now empathy, emotional intelligence, all those beautiful words we use. But he had already talked about this earlier. Okay, that how meditation, not just for the sake of meditation, accompanied by various kinds of things. He also talks about samadhi being of 2 types. Again, I'll leave that an exercise for later. And there he says the perfect mind is a diamond that reflects everything. Now, the way I've looked at it, I've visualized it in my own mind is a diamond that is covered by mist. It's covered by cobwebs. It's covered by swirling kind of, dirt and dust and so on. So we need to find ways to keep that away from the diamond, and that will reflect everything. So this is the Samadhi Pada in 51, sutras. And as I said, there are a few pictures that will actually make sense. Now he comes to the sadhana pada. Like I said, now that we've explained what is samadhi, what is this glorious state of samadhi, right? Now the question is, how do we get there? And that's what the sadhana pada is all about. He starts by talking about the concept of kriya yoga, which is a very tight summary of how to get there without doing many other things. Basically, what I'm saying is he gives a lot of options to people of how to get to samadhi, including the kriya yoga technique. But there are about 3 or 4 lines over there in the beginning of this chapter. There are 5 kleshas, which is mentioned over here. He says that mankind is consumed by these 5 challenges. Okay, and I'm reading it out to you. Ignorance, which is called avidya. Okay, attachment. We have heard about this all the time. Attachment is useless because everything's going to die, etc. But nevertheless, we continue to be gripped by attachment. We love, we care, we want. we have tears when somebody comes and goes, whatever it is. So there is this attachment, and there is also egoism, the sense of me being somehow very special, right? And that is something which is a constant theme. Is how do we grapple with it? How do we recognize it? How do we make specific attempts to diminish it? Though is it really possible? It may take several lifetimes. God alone knows. Aversion, so quite the opposite of attachment is aversion, dislike for something, not wanting it. So he looks at it as two sides of the same coin, which is a very interesting and a great concept. And the overriding fear of death. Yeah, the fear of death seems. So these 5 things are constantly running around all of us, and they help. They're creating chaos for us. And basically, because of this, we are caught in this, and we are, in a kind of a constant state of turmoil. And he calls it as the ego is the manifestation of ignorance, because the ego is what makes you believe you are somehow ultra special and different from everybody else. And it's very deflating to believe that you're actually not. You're quite ordinary, and there's nothing special about you. But that will require, a lot of time. One of the most beautiful things I read was that, sorrow arrives, that everything is sorrow, which is also a Buddhist philosophy, to the best of my knowledge, that, sorrow arrives disguised as pleasure, in the sense that you crave for something, and when that craving is met, it is immediately followed by sorrow, sadness. Vacation is over, something that you're looking forward to. So you again crave for it, and you again get into this cycle of wanting. So that's why the point is the sources of sorrow rooted in ignorance. What are the sources of sorrow? Are those 5 kleshas which I talked about. They cause karma. Side by side, there are these 3 gunas, which are sattva, rajas, and tamas, which is like a constantly calibrating cocktail of things that color our perception of practically everything else. It's a very, very beautiful concept. Okay. And that is why what I see, and what Mohit sees and what Lipika sees, the very same thing, we view it in a different way. That's because the calibration of those 3 gunas is quite different. And that particular concept of the gunas is really, really critical in the reading of the book as well. Okay. Where he makes the profound statement that the scene, what we see, exists for the seer within. Now, I want to actually leave you in that state of confusion, because that sentence is very powerful, and it won't be possible to decipher it immediately, but it's very enigmatic. It's a very beautiful sentence, that whatever I see exists for as a veil for my ego. My ego is showing me that stuff. And as soon as I realize that it's all an illusion, things will become better. But for now, we leave it at the moment. And that's why he very clearly defines what are the 8 limbs of yoga. And this is, to me, a masterpiece in structured communication again. And this is how it sounds. Yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, samadhi, ashto angani. This is one line in which he encapsulates the 8 limbs of yoga. So then what are these 8 limbs of yoga? Of course, I know that all of you are here because you know more better than others that yoga is not only about the asanas, which is anyway the perception of 99% of the people. I don't think there's anything wrong in that, in the sense that we all have our journeys, right? We are attracted by the physical part. We like the turns and twists. All that is fine. And it requires a certain maturity of the mind, experiences, etc., before you realize there's probably something more to it. So to expect that everyone will understand all the 8 limbs of yoga is probably not fair at all. But look at the structuring of these 8 limbs, right? They're all equal, they're all important, etc. But there's a structure behind it. Yama refers to your social behavior, how you deal with the outside world. So these are the 8 limbs of yoga. Yama, external observances. Niyama is your mind, how you deal with your mind, and so on. Asana is, of course, your keeping your limbs supple and so on for long periods of time. The idea being that as you move towards meditation, you're going to need strength and to be able to meditate for long times. Pranayama is obviously the management of breath. Pratyahara is the management of your senses, and so on. Thereafter, so here are some examples of graphics. Just wanted to show you. Okay, we have this example of niyamas on the right hand side. Okay. Then we also talk about Vibhuti Pada, then the concepts of Bahiranga, Antaranga, etc. There's a very profound concept of Samyama. I urge you, if you're going to get this book, whether my book or some other book, spend time in learning the concept of Samyama, because it's mind-blowingly beautiful. And then he talks about other concepts, and he talks about how Samyama on various activities will reveal entirely new areas of knowledge which you could never have imagined before. You'll get a lot of powers. And this is the tricky part. The powers are so profound, strength, the ability to be invisible, the ability to do time travel, the ability to be infinitely strong, and so on and so forth and so on. First of all, the enunciation of the Sanskrit is extremely beautiful and delicate, very, very nice. But to understand that, also that, okay, in the process of working towards yoga, using those 8 limbs of yoga, and using the concept of samyama, you will probably end up acquiring a lot of powers which are interesting, but that's not the intent of yoga, which is what he says. He says there's a possibility that you'll be, entranced by these kinds of things, and you will shift away your focus from the attainment of yoga. Like, who doesn't want to be invisible, for example, right? And that's actually a very, very interesting point. The way analogy you can think about is that when you churn butter, right? So all the nice part of the butter is always the sides of the vessel, but the real not very attractive part is the whey, the liquidy, whitish liquid, which is, and that's the real deal. That's what he talks about. So, and then he explains the concept that the past, present, and future exist at the same moment. Again, a very, very complex metaphysical thing to actually consider. All right, and then finally we come to the Kaivalya Pada, which is a very, very delicate piece of writing. And he talks about how we are born. Just because we're in human form now doesn't guarantee that we'll be born as a human in the next birth. It all depends on what we have done, our accumulation of karma, etc., over generations and so on. It's actually very convincing what he talks about. Karma is explained in great detail. Why we behave the way we do is because of prior samskaras or prior impressions of our mind. So we need to go and figure out how do we stop ourselves. Because whatever we seem to be doing seems to be because we're driven by some kind of, some code that has some tattoo on our minds, which we have to stop ourselves from doing, right? And it's very, very difficult, but very easy to understand in a different way as well. But at the end of all this whole state of samadhi, he talks about a lovely concept called the dharma megha samadhi. I've got the words backwards, excuse me. So it's dharma megha samadhi, which talks about being a state of splendid isolation. Glorious isolation where you're drenched by the rains of dharma, at which point all your kleshas, your karmas, even knowledge itself becomes useful. You are completely washed away from you, and you are in this glorious state of great light, which possibly lights up, the entire universe or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, that's the final state of Kaivalya. And in the 34th line, he comes to a close of what he calls, the Yoga Sutras, right? So this is, a quick journey here.
Open the floor for questions from everyone. And I would recommend everyone to actually put their questions in the chat box if they have any. While we have definitely one of the questions from Dr. Srinivasan, in fact, he asked it. He basically is asking, how do you develop social harmony through Patanjali Yoga Sutras, the external harmony and the internal harmony, which I think through your Bahiranga as well as the Antaranga you mentioned, but I think you can put some more light onto that.
Yes, happy to do so. Now, of course, a very large question. I don't think this is possible to give a snappy answer for that. But the point is, you see, as I said, there's this whole Bahira. He moves progressively from the outward inwards. Okay, this is the master communicator explaining step by step how to resolve your outside world, how to deal with the outside world, slowly come to your mind, as in your how you're behaving and so on a daily basis, and then your body, then your breath, then your senses, and at that point you bridge into meditation and so on. So each of them is being mellowed. So the yama part, for example, and I don't know who asked that question. I'm going to try to answer it in my own way. He talks about the 5 principles. Principle number 1 being ahimsa. The rest are fine. Truth, celibacy, what have you. He talks about all those kind of things. But he mentions ahimsa as the first, I even call it a primordial kind of a quality required, which means non-violence in thought, speech, words, and so on and so forth. No, it's not. I'm not talking about a Gandhi type of ahimsa, which is not at all my intent here. But he's saying that by showing perhaps compassion, by to all living beings in every form for whatever journey that they are going through, etc. Perhaps we become a little more mellow in the way we look at stuff. Therefore, yoga classes should also be emphasizing these kinds of things. And over a period of time, will society as a whole start thinking like that? Maybe. One of our problems is that we don't, like I said, when we go to yoga classes, they don't teach us much about yama niyama. They go straight to the asanas. Now, how this helps further down the road is, our understanding of, the things that we want. The niyama, for example, is a rules of behavior, including non-coveting, being content, etc., etc. That's what the second part is, the niyama. Okay, there are 5 things over there. But what is particularly nice is austerity, minimalism, not wanting stuff, being quite happy the way you are, etc. These are fabulous qualities, easy to talk about it, but every day we are bombarded with Amazon sending us stuff. Every day we have advertisements. It's all very, very difficult. But the way I look at it is, if you think of all this as some kind of a mirage, a kind of a drama playing out, you may be able to step back and say, why should I be engaged with all these kinds of things? Will all this, with this collective attitude, lead to social harmony? I suspect it will. But your guess is as good as mine. I'm not sure if I answered your question, so I just tried.
Yes, I think it's a very well tried attempt, and you were definitely very successful in explaining it the way Patanjali, Maharishi Patanjali himself would have thought. In fact, your book specifically mentions about the outward to the inward journey, and I specifically liked reading it. Ladies and gentlemen, very interestingly, what Vasudev has also done, he has actually attempted to give an illustration or to give an example with his personal life. So, for example, when he's trying to tell you what is the absorption of knowledge, how do you make it pratyakshadarshi? How do you feel it? He has given the example of violin that he plays, and certainly towards the end of the session, we will request him to play some violin for us and may be able to explain this format of absorption of knowledge. Oh, he's ready.
So no, I'm not ready. I just wanted to show you. Yeah.
So there's one more question that has come, which is very common nowadays, because every one of us who are usually not so aware, we think asanas are the only yogas.
Yeah.
And that's how we have very recently we have been thinking about it as well. So much so that when the first time in 1962's in Rishikesh at Padmatashram, the World Yoga Day was celebrated. And of course, it's been glorified and notified to the world very recently. But since 1960s, the essence of the yoga was always the yoga, the sum. But now we only think them to be more like a physical exercise. So Bharat Sharma ji is asking, what is your take on this, if you can throw some light on that?
Yeah. So, on a very practical note, so obviously, by the way, the reason I happened to write this book to begin with was because, the publisher was very well aware that I'm a asana enthusiast. So every day I spend an hour and a half, every day, whether I'm ill or whatever, it's just become a habit. I can't not do it. Right now, so of course, now that people who know the Yoga Sutras realize that it's only 1/8 of the whole puzzle. Right, and it is the most visible. It's the most people like it because it makes you feel healthy, etc., etc. But the purists, more conservative people might say, ye kya ho raha hai? This is not making any sense. Now, I'm a little more liberal in my view, because I feel that if you decide that asanas is for you, because you don't have time for these things like meditation, pranayama, ye sab kya ho raha hai? Just badi baatein. I'm not interested. Main yoga karunga. It doesn't matter. Everybody has got their own journey, right? Now, as you start doing yoga, I'm talking about asana part, excuse me. As you start doing asanas, the time will come when you actually start enjoying being in a place in an asana for a long period of time. You will actually start. So in that time, your mind will suddenly start turning towards other parts of yama, niyama, and so on. It's all about slowing down. Now, yesterday while I was doing yoga, while I was doing asanas in the morning, I realized my mind was somewhere else, and I tried to pull myself back. I said, I'm doing a mechanical movement. This is not making any sense. So this maturity takes time. This brewing, we can't, especially if you tell younger people, let me teach you about yama niyama. So they tell a 20-year-old boy or girl, ahimsa and all these great things. They don't have time for that. They need time to make mistakes. And then there is a time when all these things, so maturity, the level of maturity, everyone has, it's different. The journey is different. I'm 59 years old, so it's taken me time to get here, right? While I agree that it's a very unfortunate thing that asana practice has become distorted in many ways. We have goat yoga, we have beer yoga, etc., etc. but I'm a little more forgiving in the sense that while it's unpleasant to believe, because it's not a purist kind of a thing, out of those 10 people who go for goat yoga, I think 2 or 3 people will ultimately come around and say, I need to figure out what Patanjali said about yoga. This is the larger picture. This is something I need to find out. Because if I start a yoga class, Mohit, with saying I'm going to teach Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, join me. The first thing I start talking about is yama, niyama, ahimsa, etc. They will leave right away because the people in today's world want results. What's my takeaway? That's the big thing, right? What's my takeaway? So that is the way it is. And I think teachers and bodies of knowledge have to adapt to a changing world. We can't be rigid, right? I myself don't do any goat yoga or any other yoga. I do hopefully the way it's supposed to be done. But I can understand, though I'm uncomfortable. I hope I answered.
Yes, in fact, that's where I started the session with the scale over quality. And this is the present times. We are in times when we find Lord Buddha outside the spas. So definitely we can imagine it. Slowing down is not what we look at. In fact, these are the times of speed over trust. We need to be fast, and the entire startup ecosystem, if people can relate to that, is only about speed over trust. Let it happen. But it takes time. You're right. In fact, once you are into the practice, even if it's asanas, at least this is one step. You don't.
It's a step.
We move ahead with that.
Yeah.
I think we're getting a lot of.
Oh, go ahead. Please go ahead. You take the questions for me.
Deep insights onto the book. But ladies and gentlemen, let me be very honest. Once you start reading the book as well, and I have tried it with the Vivekananda's commentary also on the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, and then keeping both the books together, I did realize that this book is just not a book to be read, but it has to be felt. You have to be in that journey when you read it, experience it, and share it with others, and that's where the comment.
I want to make a point, Mohit. That I have also been in the rat race. It's not that I'm this great saint with an ashram. No, I am a rat race. I am a fellow rat. There's nothing ऐसी बात नहीं है. It just takes time. It just takes time for you to disengage and it's a constant battle. The way I look at it is, you just because you read something doesn't mean you absorb it and start acting on it. But at least it makes you aware. It makes you aware. The possible use of a harsh word. Let's say you get angry with me and you start shouting at me for some reason. Now, either I can respond in the same way, or I can spend a couple of microseconds trying to analyze why is Mohit behaving with me like that? Why am I responding like that? So I think what it does, and this whole Western concept of emotional intelligence and so on, is very much part of all this, is understanding why is my mind being affected like that? Can I do something about it? Sometimes I succeed, sometimes I fail. Like I said, I'm still a fellow rat on the rat journey, right? But at least now the knowledge is there. What can I do about it? But the transformation is going to take time. Unfortunately, there's no shortcut.
And you use the Western term of emotional intelligence. There's something that I can apply to this entire concept of Patanjali Yoga, design thinking. It's like give a thought before you go into action. It's very important. To everyone, it's a simple raise your hand in case you would like to join the community. We would be happy to send the book as well as part of the co-read that we are planning with Vasudev. In case you all are interested, whoever are there, raise the hand, send a yes, say a big yay, yippee on the chat, whatever you feel like you can send. And I think we are already 8:20. I didn't realize a lecture can be so interesting.
Oh, maybe I was talking too much.
Wish you would have been my teacher in my education while I was taking it. At least you are trying to inculcate the habits of Patanjali Yoga Sutra of making the communication interesting. So we see a lot of hands being raised. People are interested. People are keen. We will send the link to all of you for that. That's one. But Vasudev, music definitely plays a very important role in somebody's, I should say, the role of samadhi and the liberation and getting into that mode of awareness. So why don't you play some notes on your violin for us?
I'm happy to, but I'm wondering if you would like to, if I can answer at least one more question very briefly, if there's any other question. I don't want anyone to feel shortchanged.
Somebody has actually commented, Leelaji has commented that fellow travelers in the rat race. So that's a lovely comment.
Yeah.
Dr.
Okay,
Srinivasan has
don't be
also,
offended. I'm just making fun of myself. I'm just making fun of myself, not of
Dr.
anybody else.
Srinivasan is a very curious, very kind-hearted patron of ours. He has asked a couple of questions, which I think to Dr. Srinivasan are part of the book and also as part of the Kori, because they are very detailed questions. He's asking how many kind of vairagyas, how many kind of pratyaharas. So I think for the benefit of all, we can keep that as a
Yes, Kumar.
question to be discussed alongside everyone. And Dr. Srinivasan's support would be very much we will seek. Yes, I let me just check this. So yes, though I answered it to Rumiji, she has asked is it Dharma Megha Samadhi or is it Dharma Medha Samadhi? If you can just clarify, then I will read it from the book as well.
As far I know, is Dharma make a samadhi.
Yeah. In fact, that's what you've written in the book as well. When the
Yeah,
yogi is indifferent to the vast knowledge he has acquired through his efforts,
yeah.
he's in the Dharma Megha Samadhi. So that's what Rumiji it is, and
That
that's
is very, very beautifully. Even enunciating that word, this is about the 27th or 28th sutra in the last
yeah.
uh, Kaivalya Padam. It's very, very, very pretty. I mean, you really feel it as a climax of sorts that happened. This is what it's all about. But unfortunately, we have to go through the grind. Okay. So I have my email ID there as well,
So
and I have given a number. If someone wants to contact me, they can. Go
yeah.
ahead, please, Mohit. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Boliye.
Yeah, so we will also put that across. Vasudev is available on
Yes,
social
I am.
platforms as well, and also the Kori that we will start. We have already formed a community on the
Yeah.
Frog app, which is frog.social. You can download it from there. You can join the community where he would be happy to answer these questions, stay in touch in a more disciplined way, and that's what Patanjali Yoga Sutras are also all about. It's about the right kind of yoga and the discipline. So if there's anything else which is there, you may please put it in the chat box. But since we are coming towards the close of the session, I would now request Vasudevji to um,
Yes,
say
I
something
will.
in the while.
I have made a lot of remarks there about music being a vehicle for this. Those of us in classical music and music journalists realize that these vibrations from music have an effect. I know that I'm not the only person to be saying this, right? So I've made a lot of references to music in the book because certain rags do take your mind in a state of bliss, a state of peace, etc. So there can be no doubt about it that music has a huge impact on the way we think. I mean, it's a no-brainer. I'm not saying anything new. I will. I mean, this is. I mean, I'm sitting in a chair, so it's a little difficult for me to play my classical, violin here. But I put my tanpura. Can you hear my tanpura? कुछ सुनाई पड़ रहा है? Mohit?
Yes. It's feeble, but it's there.
So the tanpura itself is an absolutely enchanting and very beautiful way. I don't know how this is going to come across because this is kind of an awkward way for me to sit and play.
Good try.
The rag called rag jog. Okay.
Fantastic. What a wonderful
Thank
way
you.
to enter this session. While we have more learnings to come, the book definitely is a companion for all of us. Let this add more music to all our life. Thanks to you, Steven. Thanks to
Thank you. Absolute pleasure, and I really appreciate the opportunity and the honor. Thank you so much.
See you soon now for each sessions, and we look forward, which starts on 7th of January. We look forward
Yes,
to
sir.
have as many people as you can join in. The book will reach to you through Rob. And it would be an immense pleasure to have you all in this journey of discussion around this beautiful book, which is as old as more than 2,500 years, I guess. And it's a great piece of wisdom. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening ahead. Thank you very much, Vasudev.
Thank you, guys. Thank you all for coming. Thank you.